geos obviously have to keep an eye on our guys to make them, you've got to keep them honest, and our guys need to keep an eye on what they're doing, because like we enforce with everyone, we're there for what comes out of the ground, not the hole we're putting in it. So we really want to make sure that we're giving a proper representative sample. So it's making sure that we're opening at the right time, closing at the right time, and flushing all that stuff through the system. The driller can sort of back the feed off a little bit and slow it down, obviously without pulling off bottom, depending on how firm the ground is. But it's very important, obviously, to keep that bit on bottom, keep the air pressure in the hole, and obviously keeping the water out and everything behind it.
In today's episode, I'm speaking with Courtney Pacey. Courtney is the general manager of VM Drilling, based out of Kalgoorlie in Australia. I met Courtney about 17 years ago when his company was doing some RC drilling for the company I was working for. Of course, as an inexperienced geo, I took things as they come at me during that program, but it left me wanting to understand more about drilling, and RC drilling in particular. I've never really been able to fill those knowledge gaps until around 2016, when I made a bit of an effort to understand what really goes on. I wanted to know what pulling off bottom really means, wanted to understand the function of a blowdown valve. I asked the drillers silly questions about shroud tolerance, and pissed off a few drilling companies by asking them to include quality clauses in drilling contracts, and I pestered drillers about the intricacies of setting good collars. I ended up writing some of this up in a paper that aims to give geologists managing RC rigs a few more tools to explore. I've included a link to this paper in the description. Now, Courtney recently popped up on my radar as he was heading to the Diggers Conference in Kalgoorlie, and because he knows his RC drilling, I thought it might be interesting to our audience to talk through some of these more elusive RC drilling principles that you don't always read about in SOPs, manuals, rig inductions, or YouTube videos. So in this talk, I try and get some clarity from Courtney so that maybe one day drillers and geologists can be merry. Now, if like me, you still don't come away from this conversation with ultimate clarity on some of these topics, and you're left with some questions and you don't have all the answers, then please do let me know in the comments, as I do intend to talk about this a little bit more in future conversations with others. Let's get into it. Hi Courtney, how's it going?
I'm good, thanks, Ren. Yourself?
Yeah, not bad. How was Diggers?
Wasn't too bad, quite busy, so we're pretty happy with it. It's obviously the busiest one we've had since 2012, so it was pretty good to bump into a lot of people we haven't managed to see, given the borders and everything. So No, it was good, very good.
Yeah, it's so you said it's the busiest. Is that because it looked? I mean, all the activity online, it looked pretty wild. So.
Yeah, it was a sellout. So I think 2,620 delegates was the number.
Where do they put them all? Where do they put all the people up?
I'm not sure. I've heard stories of people hiring out 4-bedroom houses and having about 10 people in swags in the lounge room. So I'm not 100% sure, mate. Kalgoorlie certainly swelled to capacity, that's for sure.
Gee, you would almost build a house there to rent it out every year. It's such a successful.
There's good money in it, from what I hear.
Yeah. Did you run into our guys at all, or?
I didn't know.
I've never gone actually, and I always look at it, and it looks like such a fun place to be. But do you go every year, or if you can?
Yeah, we have a booth there every year. So obviously,
Nice.
being a Kalgoorlie-based company, being local, we try and support it every year. So we've had a booth there since about 2013, I think.
It's funny, because Kalgoorlie-based company, because I remember when I first chatted to you, which is probably 15, 16 years ago, I want to say, around 2006 or 7 or 8, somewhere thereabouts.
Yeah.
We were operating South Australia, but I don't think we couldn't find a rig, and you guys came all the way over from WA, I think, to come and help us out, something like that.
Yeah, did a few jobs there. I think we did about 3 or 4 jobs in South Australia around that time with an exploration rig and a smaller machine. So.
Yeah. So and you've been with the company with VM Drilling, ever since that time. I did see you had a quick sort of dash into Africa. What was that about?
Yeah, I started with the company in 2004, I believe, and I left in 2018 for 12 months. Went to Africa for a little bit, and then hightailed at home. Had a little bit of an adventure there, and saw what it was all about. But I come back to WA. So
just adventure,
2019.
Yeah, so what was your experience? How did you find it?
It was good. It was a good experience. I was working mainly in West Africa, Burkina Faso, Mali, Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. So few little issues there. Not the safest, a couple of the safest countries. So I saw a little bit, saw enough, and come home.
I'm home. Yeah, I'm about to go to Mali in a few weeks, so it's changed a little bit since I was last there, but and a good experience, man. And look, I mean, having worked for the same drilling company for such a long time, take us through a bit of a journey. I mean, what's VM done and what you've done with VM because you're GM now, right? GM of operations,
general manager of the business.
General manager, yeah. So how many rigs have you got turning at the moment?
So at the moment, we have 9 rigs. I think we've got about 6 running with various shifts. We have seen a bit of a slowdown, so a few companies dropped a couple of the double shifts we were running. Yeah. For the last 18 months, we've probably been at about 110% capacity. We've been running pretty thin, so it's good to have a little bit of breathing space to do a bit of opportune maintenance. But in the time I've been with the business, I've seen it grow from a 2-rig company all the way up to, I think we got to about 11 or 12, and then downsized a bit now. So we're just in a bit of a period now. We're getting some new equipment in and retiring some of the old equipment.
Right, yeah. Well, I've got some questions on that because obviously one of the things I wanted to throw at you and the reasons I connected, I mean, I don't know what post I saw, but I was like, oh yeah, there's a blast from the past. We should catch up and have a chat. But one of the things that I've always enjoyed talking to drillers about, as a geologist, and you have a bunch of people that do videos on RC drilling on YouTube, right? And it's a great learning experience, but it's very... Definitely. Very geology focused. This is a chip tray, this is a splitter, and all that sort of stuff. And that's good to know. But there's all these things, particularly with RC drilling. This mysterious world of RC drilling that as geologists we just don't know what's going on, or I don't know what's going on in enough detail. So never miss an opportunity to sort of ask some stupid questions and to see what we can learn. But that's a really nice story, of growth of the company. And so you're saying, and we're sensing a bit of a, obviously, I mean, the industry is always changing, but there's definitely a bit of a slowdown in some areas, and particularly, our consulting work is really quite busy, but the contracting work that we do, which is particularly the rig work and supporting, drill rigs out there, that's been a couple of months slower to start this year, which is a bit strange. What's your feeling? What's happening out there? Or what was the vibe on the floor, I guess, at Diggers as well? Because everybody seemed to be pretty, not worried about the future in terms of, all the gold prices, the copper prices, and the forward-looking stuff. I mean, what was the vibe there, and how are you guys looking at that?
Yeah, everyone was pretty positive at the Diggers, much the same as you. We've seen a bit of a slowdown. There's a few companies that are doing less than they were, so they're not necessarily sending the rigs off site, but they're dropping a few shifts or a few rigs. I had a chat to a lot of drilling companies at the Diggers, as usually do, and they're saying the same thing. A lot of geologists are saying the same thing. So a lot of companies, I think a lot of the investment sort of washed through. We had that heavy investment post-COVID. Gold had that big run. I think a lot of people jumped in. A lot of that money, as I spoke to a few people, sort of washed through the market. People just sort of seeing what's going to happen now. Obviously, there's a few geopolitical tensions overseas that are sort of a bit of a driving force, and that hasn't really come to an end. So, but the feeling around the Diggers was pretty positive. There's a lot of big budgets getting announced. Obviously, Jake Klein for Evolution got up and predicted the gold price upwards of $2,000 US an ounce with a ceiling of 3,000. So always happy to hear that. Everybody, definitely. I mean, he's obviously trying to sell shares, right? So. But no, it's pretty positive, and we've got the battery metal run that's starting to come now as well, all at the same time. So everything that glistens isn't gold at the moment; it's quite often lithium and rare earths at the minute. So
are you guys at VM? Are you at all strategically taking that into account? Because I'm not sure if most of your work coming out of Kalgoorlie is obviously classically gold supporting, but for us, and we do more and more in the battery elements, if that's what you want to call them, and a lot of lithium work. Do you try and target that market specifically from a marketing perspective, or?
Yeah, we're very gold-centric at the moment, obviously being in Kalgoorlie. We are working sort of in the goldfields and northern goldfields. We have a few machines doing a bit of lithium work now. So we're sort of targeting everything. We don't sort of limit ourselves to any particular commodity. If people need a hole drilled in, we'll certainly go for it. But we are the emerging companies looking forward to production in lithium and those sort of metals. We do a fair bit of work with Linus in the past, so we try and broaden our horizons. Certainly not trying to keep all our eggs in one basket there.
Yeah, sure. And maybe because, I've jumped ahead a little bit, because always what I really do enjoy asking people is, how do they sort of landed in this industry? Because there's quite a bit of an advocacy sort of veneer that I've been going through with a lot of the guests, just discovering what their pathway into the industry was. And I talked to a lot of, geologists and engineers, but how did you roll into this? Did you were you offered a job on a rig at some point and never looked back, or you always wanted to be, involved with this sort of line of work, or?
Kind of, mate. My first job was actually washing drill rigs when I was 10 years old for a small drilling company my stepfather worked for. My uncle worked for Ausdrill, so it was basically a Kalgoorlie apprenticeship. I went through school, started off sighting, and that was pretty much me. So I started off sighting about a couple of months after my 18th birthday, and I haven't done anything since. So pretty much grew up with it, and then dragged up on the main streets of Boulder, worked for Ausdrill, and then sort of went to VM from there, and the rest is history, so they say.
So how what makes it's a broad question, I guess, but what makes a good driller good? I mean, when I talk to our junior geologists or go to a mine site and I run these courses that I see drilling centric in terms of sampling quality and so on. I mean, I always say, look, a lot of this stuff is about communication, right? You got to understand what your client wants and communicating with a geologist on the rig, and there's a big machine going and there's probably flies and it's 45 degrees and it makes for some challenging, and you're stuck in the same camp for 6 weeks or 3 weeks or however long it is. What sort of qualities does a driller need to have, or how did you sort of move through that and now, to the point where you're a GM of a drilling company? I mean, what's the special sauce?
Yeah, look, people skills are a huge part of it, and I had absolutely none when I started, so I was the stereotypical angry driller. But obviously that doesn't get you too far. You realise in time that if people don't like you, they're not going to do anything for you. So it's about managing your people and being adaptable. We get people in the industry from all walks of life, people that have done manually intensive or labour-intensive jobs to people who have come out of an office. One of our supervisors at the moment is a former bank manager, so we get the people from all sort of walks of life. It's quite the transition. Cool. So it's learning how to manage those people, manage your own expectations, the company's expectations, obviously the client's expectations, and like you said, just as being a good communicator and keeping the guys constantly engaged, really.
So are you involved with every hire, at that level? I mean, if you got 12 rigs, or is it sort of grown large enough that, the HR department does this and your head drillers do that? I mean, are you looking after the hiring of new drillers, or?
Yeah, we've got HR doing most of it. Anything from driller up, I'm involved in. Offsite wise, I don't have a great deal. The operations manager and the HR lady sort that out. So
and what? So
still very hands-on.
Because I can imagine, I mean, the same with we run a small company as well, and culture is as important, for people to fit into that. I mean, obviously, if I hire a geologist, I need to know their rocks and be a good geologist, I guess, and the same with you. And terms of drilling, but what's on top of the list? I mean, you probably won't have a checkbox list, but what do you look for if people walk through the door? Is there communication? But what technical background, do you have like a real specific set of technical? I mean, again, a completely ignorant question, right? Because machinery is not I've never tinkered with cars. I know how to drive them, but if you open up the bonnet, I'm lost. So, it's... do you go through drillers when you hire them, said, tell me about drilling? I mean, what are the sort of questions that you ask in an interview to sort of work out whether you want to go ahead with somebody or not?
Yeah, we certainly ask about their background, obviously do our reference checks, but the style of machinery they've operated in the past, how hands-on they are. So a lot of bigger companies don't have the operators aren't allowed to work on the machines, so how much sort of hands-on experience they've had with the machines when it comes to the maintenance side of things. But obviously we look for the qualities in people we look for is definitely the way they present themselves, the way they talk, because they not only have to talk to the crew, but we have to trust these people to communicate with the client, and they're obviously representing the company on our behalf. So good presentation and confidence goes a long way in that respect.
Yeah, because I mean, you especially when the industry is at full tilt, as it was sort of, mid last year, you're competing, and the bigger companies will probably pay the bigger salaries. So you really got to try and find a competitive advantage to attract those that talent into the business and those
Yeah, definitely. I
safety
think
obvious as well.
yeah, sorry to cut you off there. I think being a small company helps in that respect as well. So a lot of these bigger companies, they become a bit of a number. It's just it's just a churning machine. With us, where I know all the drillers. They've all got my phone number. We can speak to each other on a personal level. So we've got that. I wouldn't say family, but it's a lot closer knit than being a big company with a couple of thousand employees. We sort of sit around the 60 to 70 employee mark, and we all pretty much know each other and communicate quite regularly. So.
Yeah, it makes it more fun as well at the end of the day, job well done, so everybody home safe, that's enough to the next one. That's a sort of victory that you can celebrate with the team, and it must be good fun. So any ambitions to sort of push out a bit, or what are the world conquering, objectives here? Are you going east at some point, or are you going to stay sort of, might be asking questions you don't want to answer, which is perfectly fine. But, I like, as an entrepreneur, I always think, look, if you've got a great product and people obviously buying into what you're doing, you add a rig, you add some people but there is that sort of natural threshold beyond which it becomes detached from the personal and it turns into this more of a machine kind of thing. And you could certainly have, well, that's not who we want to be. Is that playing at all in VM?
Yeah, well, we have no ambitions to be a huge company. 10 rigs is pretty much the max for our current infrastructure, and that's where we're pretty comfortable. We've got, say, 9 going at the moment. There's a brand new rig turns up in November. Rather than sort of grow to 10 straight away, we'll look at retiring some of the older equipment and probably sit around that 7 to 8 machines until we get the newer stuff in, and look to gradually grow to 10 rigs in the 2 to 5 year plan. That's pretty much it for us. We're not planning to get to 15, 20 rigs and 1,000 employees. It's not not where we want to be.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. And maybe just go back to that preventative maintenance in between, and that's perhaps my second ignorant question. No. And that was with Pirelli at the time, obviously, when we drilled with you guys, and I think they had the processes where an external auditor engineer needed to go and check the rig out, while it was parked up at the shop to make sure that it ticked all the boxes from a safety perspective and so on. And I remember, because I wasn't used to that, I came out of a fairly greenfields exploration background, and a rig is a rig, and if it shows up,
starts poking holes.
That's right, start poking holes, and it's fine. So that was a bit of a game changer. But to what degree? And it's a serious question, because I do think, in my experience, I've had too many programs where you kind of see the rig turning up and it's literally driven off the previous site, and there is no room to get back and do that maintenance. And then, you plan everything to the best of your abilities, because obviously you guys are finishing a project somewhere else and they want to add a few holes so that stretches out, and you got to try and get your teams on site. You got your rosters, you fly in, staggered arrangement to get everybody inside, and you get the phone call that it's going to be another 5 days, and that's how it goes. So, but that's the sort of organization that goes on from an exploration perspective. When the rig then shows up, and it starts lining up, and something suddenly isn't working. And I always wonder, why is it not working suddenly? Didn't you just come from a job? And don't you guys do preventative maintenance in your downtime? Or how do you structure your rigs? 10 rigs. Do you have a process in place where after each job, or after every 2 or 3 jobs maximum, it comes back for set maintenance? Is there a process there, or is it just, hey man, if somebody wants a drill rig, off it goes, and we'll see when it breaks down?
Yeah, it's certainly opportune. We take the time to do the maintenance when we can, like we are doing now. We do try and keep on top of it. We have mobile fitters and fitters in the workshop. One of our sites, where we have 3 rigs at the moment, has full-time fitters on site. We do monthly inspections. The supervisors of the senior drillers do weekly driller inspections. So we do try and highlight these hazards before they come to pass. Sometimes we do have the occasional breakdown, which we can't help, but we are aware that every breakdown, the longer it takes, it adds a higher cost per metre to the client. So we do try and keep on top of it. But we do that with obviously the fitters out in the workshop. If we've had a machine in the workshop for a while and it goes to a job, we generally try and send a fitter with it just to make sure everything's going right. Might do a little bit of calibration here and there, but we do try and keep on top of it. So it's certainly our aim for mechanical availability when it goes there. And we're sort of sitting around that 95 to 96% mechanical availability across all our sites. So it's pretty high. We're pretty happy with it.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, it's it's hard to I guess structure everything in, because you just have to roll with the punches, and having mobile people that are just able to go out and fix stuff if and when it happens, that's probably a big part of it. But and that actually got me thinking about the contracts, and this is another sort of pet subject in terms of the contracts out there. Have you seen any trends in the last 15 years in terms of what people do and don't want in their contracts? Are people too lawyered up? Is it not practical? Has it become more practical? What sort of trends have you seen from what, some companies don't even have a contract, they just roll out and, an invoice gets sent at some point. What to you, for people listening, mostly geologists, what should we be aware of when we look at these contracts? I'll tell you a couple of things that are on my list in a minute, but what's your sort of current thinking about any trends in that space?
Yeah, it's very company specific. So the larger companies we work for, the larger the company tends to be the larger the contract, and then the same with the smaller. So we'll send out a pricing schedule. Some companies will sign those, and that will become the contract. It's basically just an agreement on rates. The biggest thing now that I think we need to keep an eye out for these longer jobs is the rise and fall. A lot of companies will put a clause in there with no rise and fall in the contract over the term of the contract. So if that's a few years, then really need on our behalf, the contractor's behalf, we need to be trying to get a rise and fall in there, given the increased wages that we've seen, now the fuel, increased cost of steel, and all the supply chain constraints we're seeing. Our costs as a business have gone up quite exponentially over the last 18 months. So we need to have that room to move in those contracts. And we have a few long-term contracts, and our clients have been quite welcome to us, at least starting the conversation with raising rates. So I think the rise and the fall is pretty important at the moment for the contractors. There's got to be some form of protection in there for us, because we are hit pretty hard, as are the clients. But being a smaller company with like you said, the bigger drilling companies are offering the bigger dollars, and we need to try and match it, and that sort of comes off our bottom line. So.
Yeah, that's a good point, and we have the same issues, although our contracts are generally speaking not as long term. So we just every new proposal that goes out, it's a new slice in time, and whatever the rates situation is. But and you're right. I mean, obviously the larger companies have more stringent requirements from a legal perspective, but I've also been involved. I'm either from the company side, but also from the from a service providing perspective with setting contracts up, and between drillers and clients, and there's a fair bit of to and fro involved with that. I mean, obviously key clauses are safety clauses, but what about quality clauses, for instance? Because obviously I've seen a whole bunch of variations of that, particularly with RC drilling. You can talk about recovery, but how do you really measure that, right? I mean, and there is some line in there about good recovery. Well, what does that mean? Are you, and even things like, and I'll come back to this, but pulling off bottom and how to deal with that sample consistency. To what degree are you worried about that, or do you just let it go into? Do you just let it happen and let the driller work it out on site? And if people want their quality clauses in there, whatever, we'll run with it. Well, how do you see any of that to begin with? And if you do, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, we've definitely seen a bit of it. The QA/QC side is generally, they'll talk about the consistent samples. Excuse me, obviously the duplicates being the same weight and all that. I have seen a fair bit of survey deviation, so whole deviation during a gyro survey, so plus or minus 2 degrees is quite a common one. In regards to the pulling off bottom and the sample consistency, it's very much dependent on the ground type. So when we see that in the contract, we'll have a chat to the client. Definitely in the oxide and the lighter material, pulling back and stopping to flush that stuff through the sampling system is required. But generally in hard ground, especially with the exploration, when we're running booster auxiliaries, is 1,000 PSI behind it. If you pull off the bottom in hard rock, and there's you've got a water head above you just beating, there's a risk of the water inundation in the sample, and also it's quite wearing and taxing on the wear side of the sampling system, so tubes and wear bins. So it's just having a chat with the client. Generally, pulling off bottom in the harder ground isn't required, but in the softer ground, definitely it is, and we do enforce that.
Yeah, that's interesting because I've had those discussions on site and beforehand as well about the pulling off bottom, and you're quite right in terms of the hard rock. I mean, I think there's also an extra fuel implication because as you pull off, pressure drops a bit, and you need to build that back up, and it costs a bit more diesel to get all that running again. But I mean, it is interesting though, because I've seen it in quite a few legacy contracts from the 90s, and it sort of perpetuates, and I never really get on the same page with either client or driller. And when you're actually out on the rig, and the geologist, let's face it, 9 out of 10 times, has 1 or 2 years experience and not 30 years experience, then that conversation does become a bit awkward. Have you yourself or with drillers, maybe a couple of examples of how what things you've heard and how you try to resolve that? Because I really wanted to hone in on that a little bit, because a splitter and the sample weight's the same way. Let's come back to that in a minute. But in terms of that pressure management, it's always a little bit of there's a bit of mystique about that, and I thought this is the right time to remove all of that once and for all. So you already said, look, if you're in soft ground and you oxide, okay, there's a different approach to it. In hard rock, describe how we should word it, us being geologist and exploration manager, whatever, and what the correct procedure is, and how you would capture that in terms of the procedure that the geologist on the rig needs to look out for, and how they would know that. Do you understand where I'm going?
Yeah, I understand completely, yeah. So obviously it's I don't know how you structure it, call it the firm, competent ground material or something. I'm not really sure, but we'll run with that one for now. Definitely, it's keeping an eye on what the guys are doing. So generally, a lot of rigs have a meter mark on the side of ours do have a meter mark on the side of the rig. So when that meter mark comes to line up with the head, the guys will open the butterflies, the dust boots, what you want to call them, and drop the sample. So it's just making sure that we drop the sample to its fullness, so everything drops out of the bottom of the splitter and the bags are full. A lot of people will try and rush it if they don't know what they're doing, or they're sort of not paying attention. So it's geos obviously have to keep an eye on our guys to make them, you've got to keep them honest, and our guys need to keep an eye on what they're doing, because like we enforce with everyone, we're there for what comes out of the ground, not the hole we're putting in it. So we really want to make sure that we're giving a proper representative sample. So it's making sure that we're opening at the right time, closing at the right time, and flushing all that stuff through the system. The driller can sort of back the feet off a little bit and slow it down, obviously without pulling off bottom, depending on how firm the ground is. But it's very important, obviously, to keep that bit on bottom, keep the air pressure in the hole, and obviously keeping the water out and everything behind it. So it's
because that's the thing. Sorry to interrupt, but that it's about keeping that pressure on, right? And so if you pull back off, then that's, or if you stop drilling, I guess that's not good for the speed of the process, I guess, and it doesn't really. Yeah,
100%. If you're drilling exploration, you might have anywhere from 800 to 1,000 psi on the bit. If you pull off the bottom, and it'll flush back to about 240, and then you push the bit back down, you need to build that pressure back up again. So if you're a few hundred meters down and you've got a water head on top, that pushes the water out, and then it floods back in the hole, and there's a risk of it entering the drill string while you're trying to build that pressure back up. And then you find you dry the sample out just before the end of the next meter, and they expect you to pull back off again. So you're left with a very ordinary sample, to say the least. So it's pretty important to keep that pressure in the hole, keep the flushing pressure behind the bit, flushing the hole out. And then in terms of in terms of that risk about overpressuring and blowing the collar, is there a discussion at all, or is there an argument at all to because that takes time. We're not drilling meters. We're mucking around with the first 6 meters, and if the ground is a bit loose, or you suspect that you might not be able to build that pressure up, what dialogue between geologist and driller needs to be about perhaps putting a bit more effort in that collaring, or maybe collaring to 12 meters, or cementing of some sort? I mean, and I'm probably using all the wrong terms here, but
I'll match your quality rock statement with my lack of knowledge about drilling terminology. But to what degree is there a relevant discussion about the quality of that collar at that point in time, especially when there's a lot of pressure involved?
Yeah, definitely. So as a driller, the most important part of your hole is, apart from the samples, is the collar, because the old saying is amongst us, if you look after the collar, it will look after you. So the last thing we want to do is get halfway through a 300-metre hole and be covered in water and stuff and have to try and pull out and recollar. So definitely collaring into some competent ground or putting a quality collar in is key. We've put collars in down to 100 metres if we've had to. So we've done some very deep holes. We did one 732-metre hole for Saracen at Red October at the time, and we steel cased that and concreted that into competent rock before we carried on with it. So it's very much the ground conditions dependent. We collared that one through a salt lake, so it was definitely needed. But generally, if you've been on site, you've drilled a few holes, you'll know where the competent ground is and where you can case to. The oxide won't really hold much out, but if you can get to some transitional material, you're pretty well home and hose. But if you do have bulk water and a lot of loose material, you just need to case deeper. So it's not uncommon to case 6, 12, 30 metres, anywhere down to like 100.
Yeah, but so to what degree should the geologist on the rig, if I just go back to that classic role, just let that driller decide that? And to what degree is there, and I'm not talking about what you guys are doing, but in general, right? Because these are kind of the nuances that I sometimes struggle to try and explain, because clearly I don't understand it well enough, and I don't know well enough what goes on in these holes because I haven't been at the steering wheel. Is there obviously driller looking after their collar gives overall better result, but is there any argument for them to not do that for any sense of speed increase or meters, and to just pull out and call it, look, the ground is not good enough? You see my point? Because I want to always try and say, look, if it takes us a bit more time and therefore money to collar deeper or better, I'd rather take that risk as a company and be involved in that discussion and say, look, we have a lower risk tolerance here than perhaps you have as a driller here, and I find it difficult to connect and really describe that. I guess I can't really capture that in words. And so basically, you're just at the you're just going to have to let the driller make their decisions. And when they say, look, there's water coming in the hole, I can't push it out because the collar will go, then okay, all you can say is, okay, I guess we'll go to the next hole. To what degree do geologists have the ability to have that discussion with a driller, and how should they frame that? And to what degree does a driller actually have buy-in or something to gain in setting a better collar? Sorry, I'm probably garbling everything up, but I do want to try and get to the bottom of this a little bit.
Yeah, no, definitely. There's no benefit. Well, sorry, I wouldn't say that. There should be no benefit for the driller to just call the hole, like hole after hole after hole, say, it's no good, move to the next one. We're there to offer a service, and if the service is to drill, say, a 300-metre hole or a 30-metre hole for that matter, we need to do our best to get to the bottom, to get to target. So if that means casing deeper, it means casing deeper. Obviously, if it's going to be a case of it might take me a whole day to case this hole, then that's a conversation we need to have with the client, have the geologist, and it's probably a conversation that I'd need to be involved in with the person running the job, because there is costs associated with that and work time. Obviously, so your cost per metre is going to go up, but it just depends how badly you want the hole to that target. And it's not, like I said, it's not uncommon. It's stuff we've done before. If the driller's blowing collar after collar after collar, it's probably time for the geologist to just have that conversation. Obviously, it's a bit daunting. You don't really want to approach an angry driller because, there's like I said, they don't want to get covered in stuff. But it's definitely a conversation that needs to be had, or at least ask, what can we do better? Is there anything we can do better to try and prevent this?
Well, that makes sense, but they'll probably won't let it blow, right? They'll probably pull out when they sense that there's a risk for that to happen, and then you just don't know. I mean, my point is the framework of reference from a geologist perspective is never really tested. I mean, I never feel like I'm understanding the decision making because there's nobody that comes up to you and say, this is what's happening at the best of times, right? And if that happens, then the way it's communicated, all I find is I don't understand why indeed at that point in time we couldn't decide to put that, collar down to 12 meter and instead of 6 or to 30 and make sure that we don't have that problem. And again, coming back to the contract, I've been trying to come up with ways how we can at least have that discussion early to say, look, this is important to us. And I'd rather not let it come to a discussion of a geologist on the rig in the midst of things with a driller at in the middle of the day with a rig turning. Is there any benefit, or is there anything that you can structure to make that process? I mean, I guess the answer is no. Otherwise, somebody would have already done it. But I do find I'm quite often a little bit lost in that, and perhaps I'm the only one, and people listening to this go, well, I don't know what your problem is, which is fair enough. But I've always find that dialogue a little bit difficult to have.
Yeah, definitely. I'm not really sure how to answer. It's
no.
there needs to be a dialogue. I definitely agree with you. So there needs to be the drill. If there's an issue with the hole, and it is stipulated in most contracts that if there's a risk of losing the rods, the driller approaches the geologist and will say, and there's a risk of getting stuck here, or this might happen, that might happen, and the geologist makes the call, because if they make the call to keep going and the rods get stuck, then it's a chargeable event. So. I think I have heard of a lot of drillers in the past in some tricky ground, sort of using that as the get out of jail free card, which
that's
I
what I mean.
Agree with.
That's exactly what I mean.
Exactly. Yeah. So if there's if you suspect something like that's going on, then you probably need to speak to the supervisor or the boss and get someone out there to have a look at it.
But that is exactly what I mean. And at that point in time, if you're the geologist on the rig, you have no idea what's going on, right? The rig is just going, and because the drillers just made the call, and you got to be pretty strong in your shoes as the 20-something-year-old geologist with a bunch of folks saying, look, we're going there. This is my judgment. There is, as much as we talked about communication, that dialogue rarely happens, and if it happens, I find it difficult to actually technically understand exactly why. I'm probably nerdy enough to want to know exactly from which what did you see? What was it exactly that would happen if you would continue? What is the risk? What is the implication? And can we prevent it? And what is the cost of preventing it versus the potential gain that we have? And what I then sometimes think is that is it just because we can't drill meters as fast, right? And you call it the get out of jail free card, but the more meters drilled, the happier the company is. And I don't want to get into that suspicious space, because then the relationship sours, and I'm all about trust with these relationships. You got to trust each other in terms of trying to do the right thing. So the get out of jail card, I mean, what should geologists ask at that point in time of a driller? Sorry to keep hanging on this, but these are one of these things that have been on my mind for a long time. How do we approach that?
Yeah, definitely. So it's just trying to extract as much information out of the driller as possible. So, I guess the 5 whys is a good start, but how is it going to get stuck? What's the concern? And just trying to understand a bit more of the drilling process. I guess it's a bit of a tricky one, but it's I'm not saying all drillers are like that. There's a lot of legitimate reasons that we can't continue a hole. There could be a lot of broken ground or swelling clays or stuff. So there are a few issues there we do encounter that prevent us going, but it's definitely asking exactly why and trying to get a reason out of the driller exactly why this is happening and what can be done to prevent it. Because generally 9 times out of 10 there is a solution that we can come up with to try and mitigate those risks on the next hole.
Yeah, that's good to know. Thanks. And I think leading on from that, as we talked about before, weights on splitters. I mean, you can look at that bubble 100 million times, and every time it's tilted either to the left or to the right. And to what degree have you found in the last, we talked about trends before, but have you seen a shift in people wanting, specifically in the gold industry, wanting better sampling tools, or do you just drive up with whatever splitter hangs off that rig, whether it's a riffle or a clone or a rotary device of some sort? What have you, and do you try to cater for that? Or what have you heard and seen in the last decade?
Yeah, definitely in gold has been a big push for sample quality. Obviously, that goes without saying. So We use a small cone splitter. We use a local company in Perth, Drill Sample Technologies. They're pretty well known. They've got a great system. We use a double door system, so we'll have two drop doors, and in the middle there'll be basically catches a sample. So we're able to isolate the cyclone off when we drop the sample. So there's no bias with the cyclone pushing the sample around. It's just a static drop straight on top of the cone. And just a vibrator on the cone to help everything flow through. So there have been a few companies that requested the rotary splitters. We did trial the Metzke version of the wobbly a few times. We had really good results with that in the hard ground, but in the oxide and a lot of stuff, typical with a rotary splitter or with a riffle splitter for that matter, it doesn't work that well. So the cone's pretty much, it does, yeah, it clogs up. A little bit of moisture in the ground that sort of gets stuck. So the most consistent sampling system we've had has been the cone splitter, which we use. And the biggest advantage with ours is the double drop doors, so we can isolate that pressure from the cyclone from pushing any sample away.
Well, that's interesting because I did a fair bit of work with the Metzger splitter, and like you said, really good results in the hard rock, and definitely from the data, when you crunch the numbers, you can actually see the improvement in precision. That is what we're all chasing, I guess, specifically in gold. So that's really good to see. And then from an accuracy perspective, it doesn't matter as much whether the thing is slightly tilted because the way it's spinning, and you can look at the data, and that's good. But yeah, version 1, I think, was the shit was a bit too narrow and it got clogged up, and then it was version 2, and I sort of lost track a little bit. But we did get some good results. But I also seem to remember that the equipment functioned with, you said wet samples, it clogs up, but I think it works quite well if it's actually a slurry and you still have your sample integrity. So have you guys tried that at all? Like wet RC drilling there from pushing the sample through? I mean, it's all about keeping it dry, which is ironic, obviously, but I've always just wondered, with that device and the data that I've seen, it seemed to suggest that that could actually resolve that clogging problem there. Have you done any wet RC drilling or?
No, we haven't. Anytime water gets sort of inundated in the samples, the client sort of pulls us up. No clients we've had have been keen for a wet RC sample in gold.
Yeah, well, not with your classic cone splitter because that wouldn't work because everything gets clogged up. But from a sampling,
with the wobbly as well.
Yeah. Okay, no, fair enough. That's that's so interesting. All this. From a geologist perspective, the sample quality is everything. So, weighing both, we weigh both the samples, have a system in place for when those samples are starting to be too much out of kilter to have a chat to the driller. Anybody that you've worked with that has really turned it into a bit of a, quantitative measuring system? Because at one point we even had, 2 or 3 drillers competing, quote unquote, with each other to get the best quality marks on the drilling, which if you sort of maneuver your data around a little bit cleverly, that can actually turn into quite a nice feedback loop. Because one thing that I found is it's really hard to provide that feedback mechanism of when the sample is good and what the driller needs to do to make that happen. I mean, samples come out, it's a constantly changing environment, and recovery is hard to measure on an RC rig. So we've put some systems in place, and I'm not sure if you see my musings in a wee paper that I wrote on this a few years ago, but it's actually worked quite well for us, and we had, a quality number of that you could assign to every rod that could sort of get you a bit of guidance. Also, for instance, the weight of the samples, right? Because if you have a 6-meter rod, those weights are not as equally distributed as one would like. The last meter is probably 50 kgs and the first meter is about 25 kgs, and that's not really that useful. And the more even out that is, the better quality, I guess, that rod or that batch of samples. What's your take on that? Are we trying to be too complicated with it, or have people tried this at all with VM? Or?
We have had one client a few years ago. We basically caught everything, so all the spoil in green bags and both splits, and they weighed everything to get a true representative sample. So once we had our system working fine, it worked well there. So they like I said, they weighed every single ounce of dirt that come out of that, come out of the ground, and I mean we drilled about 20,000 meters for them, so they were pretty happy with it. So pretty onto it. We're pretty confident in our system.
Yeah, no, it's all about. Yeah, if you want to talk about quality, it's hard to have that discussion with just words. You gotta have some numbers
Yeah,
to back that
100%.
up, right? Otherwise, you
Yeah.
just what do you mean by good quality? What does that mean? What does good recovery mean in your book? Tell me a bit about shroud tolerance, if you don't mind, because
Mm-hmm.
there are some probably legacy documents from the 90s, more coming out of Africa. I've seen. I'm sure it was Rheingold where I've seen this, but there was a shroud tolerance sort of guidance. Of a few mils, of 3 mils set, and I was like, why 3? And what is it that we're trying to prevent? And to what degree does the driller decide it should be 4 or 5? And look, to be quite honest, if you're on the rig, most geologists never have a bloody clue what the sort of tolerance is, because they don't have that conversation. Again, obviously the purpose being, to maintain your pressure and to make sure that system is closed off, at risk of obviously getting stuck. What's the balance there? Can you just put it in dummy geologist terms? How is that important? And what should we as geologists be asking or be on the lookout for that being managed in a particular way?
Yeah, so shroud tolerance, it does a few things. We generally run with a 2 to 3 mil gap. That gives us enough pressure up the outside of the string, flushing the hole, and enough pressure in the bottom of the hole, lifting the sample up. So obviously in ground where we have a lot of water inundation, we'll run a bit of a tighter gap, which will obviously fills the hole out a little bit more, helps keep the water out, gives us more pressure up a bit. In some looser ground, we might open the tolerance up a little bit to get a little bit more air flushing up the outside to try and give us a better, keep the outside open.
Mm-hmm.
But generally also what it gives us is as we drill, obviously, the bit wears. As the bit wears, it gets a bit smaller. So a couple of mil gives us that tolerance between the bit and the shroud, so we're not getting stuck. If you overrun the bit too much, it'll start getting jammed up, obviously, and getting stuck. So we can pull out and change the bit. So it gives us there's a few things that the shroud tolerance gives us, which is the flushing, the pressure up the middle of the bit, and then that gauge tolerance between the bit and the shroud. So if the
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, keep going.
No, I know. I think you might just be adding something that I was going to ask. But if you don't get that right from a sample quality perspective, is there anything that is relevant there?
Yeah, definitely. If you have the shroud's too small, most of your air in your sample is going to go up the outside and out the. It's going to be like sampling. Better off collar sampling, conventional. So, yeah, definitely keeping it tight enough to keep that flushing pressure up the middle of the bit, and lifting that sample. The more pressure going up the middle of the bit, the quicker the sample is going to come up. And obviously, what we talked about before about pulling off bottom,
Exactly.
and the need not to. If you've got the right shroud balance, then you've got enough pressure flushing up the middle of the bit, lifting that sample. So.
Yeah, and so that's sort of matches what I think I know about it. But I do have at times thought, you're looking at it, it's like I'm sure something isn't quite right. But you can't tell a driller how to drill, right? I mean, that's like the biggest. You don't want to go there. So again, what are we looking out for? Obviously, yard site return is a key indicator, right? Because if your recovery, and you're talking about weighing the samples, if you've got a little bit of an idea about the size of your hammer at that point in time and your density, you can come up with some reasonable approximations to try and measure that, other than just eyeballing it, right? How does a driller eyeball it, and when should there be a discussion? Because we know that the discussion really doesn't happen on, it just doesn't, because the driller obviously does their job as best to the best of their ability, makes the decisions that they feel comfortable making at that point in time. And the last thing you want is a bloody geologist hassling you every freaking rod saying, oh, why is this up and down? That's not what we want to do at all. But it is it's a team effort there, right? You're both trying to achieve the job. And I actually quite like learning about these things. And you want to work with somebody who has that sort of, have the same intent to try, but while still getting meters down. Obviously, you can't just, shut down after every rod and say, well, what's happening now is this and that. I get that. Long story short, with that management, what should a geologist look out for, and what's the best way to sort of, query whether we're over or under correcting there a little bit?
Yeah, so you'll generally, if they've got howling outside and not much sample, after a bit change, it'll be generally the the shroud issue. If that happens during the drilling of the hole and there has recently been a bit change, that can also be a blown inner tube. So it's a lot of the times if the driller's distracted, he might not actually know the samples are getting smaller if he's sharpening a bit or the offsiders are dropping the samples. So it's you sort of tapping him on the shoulder and just say, we can see it. We can see it in the green bags and the calicos, the difference from what we were drilling 5 metres ago to what we are now when the sample size decreases. So it's sometimes just need to tap on the shoulder and just ask for a please explain or try and correct it.
Yeah. Looks so much to learn. No, that's good, man. It's really interesting. I mean, I find if we're running these projects, you do want to start with getting people in the room without without the engines maybe going straight away when the rig rocks up, and have a wee bit of a session. Talk about what our intentions are, in terms of where we're drilling and what the quality needs to be. Spend a bit of time looking at the rig with the mast down and when the engines are off and the earplugs are out, so you can actually listen to what people are saying, and that seems to always get us off a good start, and getting a good relationship with the drillers, and fascinating. That's what's next for you, man? Are you going to do any more conferences, or is it back in running operations at the moment? And you talked about some maintenance at the moment, but seeing where the market goes, and then I mean, I guess the December, April months for you are also the quiet months. I mean, as they are for us, generally speaking, from a drilling perspective.
Yeah, historically, this last sort of December just gone wasn't. We had quite a few, because we specialise in the grade control field now. There's not a lot of exploration that we do, so a lot of our rigs are sort of tied up on long-term contracts, and basically the operation doesn't stop, so it has been pretty busy for us. For us, probably won't do too many conferences from now. There's the ROU Explorers Conference in February we'll attend.
That's always fun, that one.
Next year. It's getting bigger and bigger. I don't know how
it is too.
The current venue, because it was shoulder to shoulder last year, but that's sort of it for conferences for us. I'm just in Perth at the moment, catching up with some clients and have a few meetings. So just sort of keep pressing the flesh there, and back to the yard to keep an eye on things there. But I've got a site visit coming up. We'll just get around and see a few of our current clients, and that's pretty much it. Business as usual for us, mate.
Business as usual. No, that's the way. Well, you're going to purchase any? I joked. I was looking at purchasing a Sonic rig just for shits and giggles, because they make these really nice tiny rigs that actually can push down quite a bit. Always wanted to give that a go, and they're not that expensive. Have you played with Sonic at all throughout your career?
I haven't, mate. No, I haven't. I've got no experience with Sonic.
Yeah, no, it's just nice because sample recovery in difficult ground, unconsolidated, and gravel and alluvials and those mineral sands. It's might find somebody talk to me about Sonic at some point, because that's it's been a bit of a hobby thing to learn a bit more about. But hey, look, great to talk, man. And anything that's on your mind, or what's are you you're going to keep doing this for a bit and see where it lands, or what messages have you got for us poor geologists out there?
It's just stick with it.
Stick with it.
Talk to your drillers. Don't be scared of the drillers. They're might be a bit of a different breed we are, but we're just people. So just try and get involved. Have a beer at the end of the day. Join them in a barbecue or something. We're normal people, so we generally like to chat and do want to get along with the people we're working with. So, like I said, we all know we're there to perform a service and to offer a service. So, 9 times out of 10, most of the guys there are fully aware of that, and that's what we're there for. So, we're there for the same reasons. Like you said, we're there to work as a team. So, don't be scared. Come and say hello. Knock on the caravan door.
Knock on the caravan door, yeah. No, look, sage advice, mate. I really appreciate that. Really been an enjoyable chat. Learned a lot. Thanks for your feedback. Leave it there, but I hope I run into you maybe in Frio then in February. That
sure.
sounds like a good opportunity to have a beer again.
Yeah, definitely, mate, for sure.
Good stuff, Courtney. Hey, great to talk.